There is a town in the Australian desert where the ground itself cannot be trusted. Step off the marked path, even for a moment, and you may vanish into a darkness that has swallowed people whole, a darkness with no bottom that anyone has ever found. There are more holes in the earth here than there are people who live above it. Tens of thousands of them, some choked with rubble, some open, black and utterly silent, waiting in the red dust like mouths that never closed. The signs are everywhere, and they are not subtle. Do not walk backwards. Not a warning against clumsiness, a warning against death. Because behind you, an unmarked shaft may be dropping 30 metres into absolute blackness, and no one will hear you fall. The locals stopped building on the surface generations ago. They live below it, an entire town dug into the bones of the earth itself, hiding from something that isn't just the sun. This is Coober Pedy, and what lies beneath it is older, stranger, and far more dangerous than opal. If you're drawn to ancient history and the Earth's greatest mysteries, the places where geology, deep time, and human fear collide, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe now, because what we uncover in the next 30 minutes will change the way you look at solid ground forever. To understand Coober Pedy, you must first understand that you are not standing on land in any conventional sense. You are standing on a corpse, the fossilised remains of an inland sea that died 100 million years ago and never fully rotted away. The landscape around the town looks less like Earth than like something borrowed from another world. Low, flat-topped hills called the breakaways rise from the plain in bands of white, orange and rust red. Sediment laid down layer upon layer when this entire basin lay beneath the shallow, cold waters of the ancient Eromanga Sea. Filmmakers have used this terrain to stand in for Mars, for post-apocalyptic wastelands, for the surface of alien planets, and they have needed to change almost nothing to do it. There is a silence to the breakaways that visitors describe as almost total. No birdsong, no insect hum, only wind moving across stone that has not changed shape in millions of years. Beneath that surface, the ground is riddled, literally perforated by the compulsive digging of over a century of opal prospecting. Opal itself is a geological accident of almost impossible rarity, silica-rich water, seeping down through cracks in the old seabed sediments during a period of extreme weathering, slowly filled tiny voids and fractures with silica spheres stacked in a microscopic lattice. When that lattice is nearly perfect, it bends light into the shifting rainbow fire that makes opal so valuable. It is a process that required exact chemistry, exact timing, and geological patience measured in tens of millions of years, and it happened here more richly than almost anywhere else on the planet. But the search for that opal has turned the ground itself into a hazard. An estimated 250,000 mine shafts pockmark the region, dug by hand and machine over decades, most of them never mapped. Many never filled in. Some are barely wider than a human body. Others open into old workings that connect for hundreds of metres underground, a hidden second town beneath the visible one. Add to this a surface climate that is nearly uninhabitable, summer temperatures regularly exceeding 47°C. A sun so relentless that the only sane way to build a home is to dig one into a hillside, and you begin to understand why the people of Coober Pedy retreated below ground. It was practical, it was necessary, but it was also, they will tell you, a kind of surrender to something that was already there long before the first pick struck stone. Long before European prospectors arrived chasing colour in the stone, this country was and remains the traditional lands of the Kokatha and Antakirinja Yunkanitjatjara peoples, whose relationship with this landscape stretches back tens of thousands of years, deep into the unrecorded silence of the continent's human history. To them, this was never empty desert. It was a country alive with Chikupa, the dreaming the ancestral law that shaped the physical world and continues to govern how it must be treated. The breakaways themselves sit within a landscape of deep spiritual significance. A place understood not as inert rock, but as the visible trace of ancestral beings whose actions during the creation time carved the ridgelines, coloured the stone, and shaped the low, secretive rises of the hills. Access to certain sites within this country was, and in many cases still is, restricted, governed by law far older than any mining permit. Held by custodians whose authority to speak for these places is earned through initiation and inheritance, not curiosity. This was not superstition dressed as caution. It was accumulated, embodied knowledge of a landscape that could kill the unprepared knowledge of where water could and could not be found, where the ground was stable and where it was not, where a person could shelter from heat that killed within hours, and where the country simply should not be disturbed. When European opal seekers arrived in the early 20th century, they came without that inheritance. They came, quite literally, blind to the land, chasing a mineral seam with no understanding of the deeper order the traditional custodians recognised. Even the name history has attached to the surrounding area Coober Pedy, rendered in English as White Man's Hole, or by some translations Boy's Waterhole, carries the memory of that first blunt collision between two entirely different ways of reading the same ground. One read it as fortune, the other had always read it as a place requiring respect and consequence. It is a pattern anthropologists and geologists alike have noted again and again across this continent. Places marked by long-standing Indigenous law and taboo so often correspond, with uncanny precision, to locations later proven by science to be genuinely hazardous, unstable ground, toxic seepage, extreme and unpredictable conditions. Whether by direct causal knowledge passed down through unthinkable spans of oral tradition, or by a form of cultural memory calibrated over millennia to danger, the old warnings were rarely arbitrary. Coober Pedy is one of the starkest modern examples of this pattern, a landscape the newcomers treated as an inert resource to be extracted, and which the oldest human relationship with this continent had always understood as something closer to a living hazard, deserving of caution bordering on reverence. The written record of Coober Pedy's danger begins almost the moment prospectors arrived, and it has never really stopped accumulating. In 1915, a 14-year-old boy named Willie Hutchison, travelling with a prospecting party searching for gold, is credited with the discovery that started it all, stumbling across a scatter of opal on the surface of what would become the richest opal field on Earth. Within years, the population exploded. Shafts multiplied across the plain with almost no central coordination, and the first deaths from falls into unmarked workings began entering local memory, the opening chapter of a hazard that, remarkably, has never been closed. By the mid-20th century, as the field expanded and machine-drilled shafts replaced hand-dug ones, the sheer density of holes turned travel across the open ground into a genuine gamble. Locals speak of vehicles, and on rare occasions, people disappearing into shafts hidden beneath drifted sand or scrub. Shafts that predated any map, dug by miners who had long since left the field or passed away, their exact locations lost with them. The town's now famous warning signs, and its official advice never to walk backwards while taking a photograph, exist because this has happened, more than once, with fatal consequences. The extreme surface climate has added its own grim entries to the record. Visitors and even seasoned residents have been caught unprepared by the ferocity of Coober Pedy's summer heat conditions, in which exposure without adequate water can produce fatal heatstroke within a matter of hours, a fact that has claimed the lives of travellers who underestimated the desert's arithmetic. Then there is the matter of the underground workings themselves, the old mines that riddle the ground beneath the town like a second forgotten city. Cave-ins in ageing, unsupported tunnels have trapped miners underground, some rescued after harrowing hours in absolute darkness, others not recovered until long after, because so many early shafts were dug without formal surveying. Entire sections of underground working exist today with no reliable modern map passages that connect, cross, and undercut each other in patterns known only to the miners who carved them, most of whom are gone. Even now, in the 21st century, authorities continue to discover previously unknown shafts and unmapped tunnel systems beneath properties and roadways voids that had sat silently under the feet of residents, sometimes for decades, before revealing themselves. Each new discovery raises the same unsettling question that has haunted this town since 1915. How much of what lies beneath Coober Pedy has never been found at all? If you think the supernatural explains any of this, the vanishing travellers, the phantom tunnels, the ground that seems to swallow people whole, wait until you hear what investigators, geologists, and mine safety officers actually found when they went looking for answers. Subscribe now, because the truth is stranger than the myth. It was perhaps inevitable that a landscape this alien, this hazardous, and this saturated with disappearance would eventually attract theories far stranger than geology. The otherworldly appearance of the breakaways, bare, banded, and utterly lifeless in places, has long fed speculation that the area sits on some kind of anomalous energy zone, occasionally described by fringe theorists as a vortex or dimensional thin spot, supposedly explaining disorientation reported by some visitors to the more remote sections of the ridge. Others, drawn by the moon-like terrain and its repeated use as an extraterrestrial film backdrop, have half-jokingly, half-earnestly proposed that the landscape's strangeness is evidence of something beyond geology altogether: ancient impact scarring, alien intervention, ley lines converging beneath the plain. Investigators, geologists, park rangers and mine safety engineers, rather than paranormal researchers, have approached these claims with patience rather than mockery, because the underlying experiences reported are real, even if the explanations offered for them are not. Disorientation on the breakaways, researchers note, correlates closely with heat exposure, dehydration, and the profound lack of visual reference points in a landscape stripped of vegetation and landmarks conditions well documented to produce genuine confusion and even mild hallucination in the human brain, entirely without supernatural assistance. The eerie silence visitors describe has a mundane cause too. The absence of vegetation and surface water removes almost all the ambient sound cues: birdsong, insect movement, rustling leaf litter that the human ear unconsciously expects, producing a stillness that reads, subjectively, as deeply unnatural. As for the shafts that swallow the unwary, no paranormal force is required. A dry, crumbling desert soil, a wind that constantly redeposits sand and scrub across old openings, and a century of undocumented, non-standardised excavation are more than sufficient to explain a landscape littered with lethal, invisible traps. Mine safety officers, who have spent careers mapping this field, describe it not as mysterious, but as an entirely predictable outcome of unregulated, individually dug excavation on a massive scale, compounded by decades of missing records. Strip away the vortex talk, the alien theories, the ley line speculation, and what remains is not a diminished mystery. It is, if anything, a more sobering one. A landscape whose dangers are entirely explicable, thoroughly documented, and still, after more than a century, killing and trapping people who do not respect it. Here, finally, is the truth beneath Coober Pedy, and it is more unsettling, not less, for being entirely mundane. This is a landscape shaped by an ancient sea that left behind not just opal, but a subsoil structure uniquely prone to instability sedimentary layers that crumble, shift, and collapse when disturbed, honeycombed further by a century and a half of largely unregulated digging. Beneath the visible town lies an estimated 250,000 shafts and an unknown, unmapped tangle of connecting tunnels, a hidden architecture of danger, with no complete blueprint in existence. expanding a little more every time a new sinkhole opens beneath a road or a backyard. Layered on top of that geological hazard is a climate operating at the edge of human survivability heat, capable of killing an unprepared traveller in hours. A factor that, combined with disorientating, landmark-free terrain, produces exactly the kind of confusion and danger long attributed by outsiders to the supernatural. And this is where the mundane explanation collapses back into something closer to reverence for what the traditional custodians of this country always understood. Long before instruments existed to measure heat stress, sediment instability, or the psychological effects of a featureless landscape, the Kokatha and Antakirinja peoples had already encoded caution about this exact country into lore, into restricted knowledge, into names and stories passed down across an unthinkable depth of time. They did not need geological surveys to know this ground demanded respect. They had already lived the consequences of ignoring it, across countless generations of accumulated experience, and had built an entire system of cultural law around not repeating those mistakes. The newcomers who arrived chasing colour in the stone rediscovered, shaft by fatal shaft, heat death by heat death, exactly what the oldest human relationship with this continent had already known. Science did not disprove the ancient warning. It simply took 100 years and a great many losses to catch up to it. Perhaps the deepest mystery beneath Coober Pedy is not geological at all. It is the recurring pattern seen again and again across this ancient continent in which the oldest human knowledge and the newest scientific instrument arrive, eventually, at the very same warning. The ground remembers longer than we do. What do you think the Earth is still trying to tell us? And are we listening? Tell us in the comments below, and subscribe for more journeys into the places where myth and science meet.